Ah, the Resident Evil series. I'm a huge fan of the series. I've played pretty much almost all of their games at this point, and even the ones that I haven't played, I at least know its existence. Resident Evil 4 is a survival horror game that used to scare me away from playing it because of its horror nature, but after bracing myself playing it, the game ended up being one of the very few games in my entire life that I actually 100% at. I played the living hell out of this game back in elementary school. It is such a fun and exciting ride, full of monsters, mad people, and really bad writing. I love Resident Evil 4. It's one of my favorite games of all time and the one that brings me to the entire Resident Evil series. Ever since then, I ended up playing pretty much almost all of their games in the series. If I recall correctly, the only games that I haven't played were the original one on the PS1 and Gun Survivor 2. Yes, I've also played the not so great ones like Survivor, Dead Aim, and 6. In fact, Survivor is the first Resident Evil game that I played. Not exactly a great introduction to the series, I know. When I was in elementary school, if there's Resident Evil on the name, I'll freaking buy it or download it. And yes, that includes the garbage Paul W.S. Anderson films. I of course grew up from that philosophy and move on to other better things in life. Ever since Resident Evil 6 came out, everyone, including myself, realized what the series has turned into. An action-packed monster fest that isn't really scary or challenging as the last 3 games, so everyone is afraid of the future that the Resident Evil series is going to bring to the table. But the moment Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 got released, everyone was hopeful that Capcom is going to bring Resident Evil back to its original survival horror roots. And everyone's wish is fulfilled. Resident Evil 7 came back and reinvented the formula with a first-person perspective and a return to its traditional survival horror roots, which initially scares me, and by that I mean I'm legitimately scared by its first-person perspective and a great emphasis on survival and horror. So I didn't buy Resident Evil 7 mostly because I'm a pussy who doesn't like horror games, especially in first person. But then I put my big boy pants and actually play Resident Evil 7 and, well, it's amazing. It is as every bit as good as everyone says it is. It is a really scary and terrifying game that truly brings back the series into its survival horror genre, and everyone is looking forward to what Capcom is going to bring in their next Resident Evil game. That or how Capcom is going to screw it all up. There's always a pattern in these games. There's a game that revolutionizes the series, and the next game is fun but ultimately not as good, and it ends up being a pointless fluff. And then the next game completely ruins the momentum, and the series has opened its way to a bunch of really angry fans. And that's what worries me about the Resident Evil 2 remake. I avoided the demo of the game like plague because I'm gonna end up playing the full game anyway. So here it is. How does Resident Evil 2 remake holds up? Welcome to Apaben's Uncapped, devouring undead since 1998. Today I'm gonna review the remake of Resident Evil 2 filled with modern graphics and over-the-shoulder third-person action shooting that the series is well known for since the 4th game. The game was released on PS4, Xbox One, and the PC. For this review, I'm playing the PC version of the game. The plot of Resident Evil 2 is pretty simple. You can play as either Leon S. Kennedy, a brand new rookie of the Raccoon City Police Department, or Claire Redfield, a college girl who is looking for her brother Chris Redfield, who is the protagonist of the first game. Whatever characters you chose, they all went back to Raccoon City for their own purposes, only to find out that the entire city has been ridden with nothing but zombies after zombies. Together, they're gonna figure out how to get out of the city while uncovering the truth behind the entire city infestation. The story of the game is pretty short and simple. It's so short and simple, you can be forgiven to say that there aren't really any. They didn't take up too much space of the game, and they don't contribute too much into anything really. The plot is just sort of there, and the game didn't make too much of an effort into it. There are some key character moments in the game, but they're so short and simple that they feel like a necessity to be put in there. It's there because the game needs a plot, rather than because the writers want to tell a gripping story. But then again, as a fan of the series, I have to admit that the story of the Resident Evil series aren't always that great, and this one is no exception. It's a cliched zombie outbreak story with a giant biomedical corporation as the culprit, something that you've seen in every zombie story ever made. It's nothing innovative and groundbreaking even back in 1998. But the thing that makes the original Resident Evil 2 special is that it didn't really take itself too seriously. The B-movie cheese and the terrible voice acting really helps on giving a more charming edge into the game. The remake, however, is a lot more serious on the delivery, which isn't going to work too well if you have a story as cliched as zombie apocalypse caused by a giant evil biomedical corporation is taking over this desolate city somewhere in America. The story ends up being really nothing special, a background noise that you can just just gloss over without thinking about it too much. It has some nice character moments, but there's not a lot of mystery or intrigue to it, and it's just sort of there for the sake of the game to exist. Maybe that's what Capcom intended. They don't want you to focus too much on the story and focus on actually surviving the zombie apocalypse mess. And if surviving a zombie apocalypse is what you're looking for, Capcom brought us something very promising. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a survival horror first and foremost. It takes place during a zombie apocalypse, and you have to use every little resource that you have to survive against all of the monsters and zombies in between your journey. The remake of Resident Evil 2 does a spectacular job at both recapturing the spirit of the original and also making a tense and gripping survival horror game. But with that being said, it's something that we've seen in many other Resident Evil games. I think the sales pitch for the remake consists of a bunch of executives saying, hey, people seem to really love the gameplay and level design of Resident Evil 7. What if we do that, except we put in a third-person over-the-shoulder perspective like in Revelations? People also love Revelations. Let's also have the previous Resident Evil characters while we're at it. And then somebody asked, okay, but what about the story? And then somebody replied, well, our story isn't that great anyway, so let's just remake the story of the second game. We remade the first one, why haven't we remade the second? And hey, Raccoon City is a great setting to have. People love it. And voila! Resident Evil 2 Remake is essentially a combination of Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil Revelations, and Resident Evil 2. It has the explorative gameplay of Resident Evil 7 mixed in with the puzzles, key hunting, and backtracking. It is Revelations over-the-shoulder third-person shooting, which means that finally you can move while aiming, but thankfully you don't have the obnoxious dodge mechanics, which means that zombies are going to hound you at every angle. And it has Resident Evil 2 story lazily tucked in because Capcom couldn't really think of a good plot for the 8th game. But it does have Raccoon City's gritty atmosphere, so there's that. And yes, all of this combination sounds like an incredibly safe and lazy risk for Capcom to take, but that's not to say that it doesn't work. All joking aside, this game manages to combine all of the amazing elements from the modern Resident Evil games with the story and atmosphere of the old Resident Evil games faithfully recreated for the modern age, which makes it an extremely attractive game for the newcomers to pick up if you want to get into Resident Evil and didn't know where to begin out of the bazillion games. But with that being said, considering that this game is a combination of a lot of other elements from the actually good modern Resident Evil games, hardcore fans of the series like me, who have played almost all of the games up to this point, will not find this game particularly new. Again, the controls feel very familiar if you have played Revelations. The exploration elements and the interface are straight out of Resident Evil 7, and the story is Resident Evil 2 remade for the modern times. At least they're giving us the option to go back to the original outfits. There's nothing that beats them sexy thighs. To put it short, the gameplay is fantastic, but nothing new for the series, which is why I said that this game is a perfect fit for all the newcomers in there. And the gameplay does a lot of really surprising things too. One of the segments that I love from the game was when you're controlling Sherry Birkin and you have to get away from some fat prick. The segment is pretty short, and yet it was somehow quite intense, even though there are zero zombies involved throughout the entire thing. The game somehow managed to make a segment where you, as a little girl, escaping from a normal uninfected fat prick, intense and terrifying. It clearly shows that Capcom has some really good talents working on it. Now let's talk about the campaigns. The game has two different campaigns with each character. We're going to name them A and B. You're going to always start the game at Campaign A. Campaign B is going to be the game being played through another character's perspective when Campaign A is taking place. So if you start the game with Leon, you are playing Leon A, and you will unlock Claire B later on. If you start off with Claire, you are playing Claire A, and you will unlock Leon B. You need to play through B in order to get to the real ending of the game, because Campaign A didn't end that much. All of the campaigns are not very long. They're around 4 to 6 hours of playthrough on the standard difficulty. The B campaigns will offer you guys new content and brand new ways to play the game. Or at least that's the idea. I thought Campaign B was supposed to be the perspective of another character when Campaign A took place, but what Campaign B really is essentially Campaign A of B's character, except with a different intro and an extended ending. For example, if you play as Claire first and then play Leon second, all of that time you play as Leon in the second is practically the same as you playing as Leon in the first. So there's literally no point for you to finish all of the 4 campaigns because 2 of them are essentially clones of each each other. And the funny thing is, thanks to this lazy cloning hack job, the second round completely messes up the continuity. During my Claire playthrough, she's the one who has to face off with G in the final battle, but the second round with Leon, it's Leon who is fighting G. So which one is it, game? These two things cannot happen at the same time at the same place. That's ridiculous. It's like saying a rock band concert takes place at the same time the janitors clean the stage. Reminds me of that SpongeBob episode. Unfortunately, this is also a problem for the original game. There are no major changes between the A and B route, so for those of you who think this game is going to be around 20 hours plus with all of these campaigns, you would be sadly mistaken. Just finish the first and the second round of the characters of your choice and never bother touching the first of your second round character because, well, it's essentially the same. And then just do the tofu minigame. It's much more interesting. And now let's talk about the PC part. I'm running this game on my Asus ROG laptop with the specs as follows, and I'm able to run this game at 900p 30 FPS on the graphics preset, which is the high preset of the game. If you have a 1050 graphics card or lower, you're gonna have to accept the console-like frame rate and the not really 1080p quality. And while the game successfully runs using my GTX 1050, it somehow only detected the VRAM of my Intel HD graphics GPU. That's a little weird. I played this game both with a controller and a mouse and keyboard. Both work really damn well, but since this is a shooter that requires more precision, the mouse and keyboard should help you aim much better. Overall, Resident Evil 2 Remake is a game that feels like a rehash. I mean, sure, it says in the title, it's the freaking remake of a game released years ago, but still, for the really hardcore fans of the Resident Evil series, this game would feel like something that you've played because it is Resident Evil 7's exploration and UI and engine mixed in with Revelation's over-the-shoulder third-person shooting, with the zombies being significantly buffed so that they don't get killed instantly through headshots, and all of that mixed in with Resident Evil 2's story and setting. You're not gonna get that much from this game if you've played all of those. But the purpose of this game isn't really for the hardcore fans. This is Capcom's way of reintroducing the old parts of the franchise into a much wider audience, and for that, this game does an extremely fantastic job. This game is absolutely recommended for those who have never played the original Resident Evil 2 because this game is essentially Resident Evil 2, remade with the mechanics of the actually good modern Resident Evil games. It doesn't really have too much of a purpose for the hardcore fans of the series other than a little bit of nostalgia and Easter eggs, but for those who have never touched anything Resident Evil related, this is about as good a time as any to enter the Resident Evil series and figure out why people love the series so much. Rating this game is a bit difficult. As a pretty hardcore fans of the series, I feel like it doesn't really have that much content to make it something worthwhile, but I need to put my bias as a fan aside and rate this game for its intended target demographic, the newcomers. As a welcome to the Resident Evil series, it is a fantastic choice. You would not be disappointed with what this game has to offer if you are new to the series, and for that, this game gets 4 caps out of 5. It's a remake that carries some faults of the original, unfortunately, but it is certainly one that does its job really damn well at recapturing the spirit, especially at introducing the newcomers into the series. If you want to get into Resident Evil but don't know which game to pick, this game sits right next to the 4th and the 7th Resident Evil games as the absolute best choices to get into the series. And now let's talk about the price. This is a AAA game sold for $60 on Steam, and it is a pretty good purchase depending on your stance towards the series. For $60, this game is absolutely fantastic for the newcomers who love survival horror and yet somehow never touched Resident Evil in their life. If you want to get into Resident Evil, you will be satisfied with your $60 purchase. However, if you're a hardcore fan of the series, well, you probably already pre-ordered the game, but in case you haven't, I'd recommend giving this game a little bit of weight. If you played 7 and Revelations, this game isn't really that much different, and if you played 7, Revelations, and 2, the previous sentiment is even stronger. But if you played all of those games and you want more of them, this game should suit you well while serving you a bit of nostalgia at the same time. While the game doesn't really give fans like me anything new, I'm really happy with this new direction. It seems to me that Capcom wants to fix the many mistakes that they did from the previous Resident Evil games and try their hardest to win back the consumers by bringing in more people into the mix. Good for you, Capcom. Good for you. I hope you can finish this belated redemption arc, and I'm looking forward to how you're going to screw up the 8th game.